Welcome to In the Balance, the Iowa Judicial Branch podcast. Welcome to In the Balance, a podcast dedicated to exploring Iowa's judicial branch, and I'm your host, Abhash Shrestha. Today, we'll be diving into the important role of interpreters in the Iowa court system. Joining us to discuss this essential service is Chris Kunej, Director of Language Access Service Office for the Iowa Judicial Branch. Welcome to In the Balance, Chris.
Hello, Abhash. Thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Oh, definitely. We want to know all about the interpretation and the role of interpreters in the Iowa Judicial Branch. So let's start with your office. Tell us a little bit about Language Access Office and what do you do?
So we oversee the state court's language access services. This would include managing court interpreter testing, certification, recruitment, and the court's roster of court interpreters. We implement and oversee statewide policies. In short, though, we provide the non-English speakers, or LEPs, limited English proficiency, meaningful participation in courts. I am myself also a certified court interpreter for some more rare languages, BCS, Bosnian, Croatian, Serbian. It's very rewarding in many ways, but it can also be stressful and demanding, that's for sure.
So, with your experience of being interpreter in all over the states and you being in your position currently, how important do you think the role of interpreter actually is?
Well, that's a great question, and I think it's immensely important. I mean, in this country, not every country does this. If you and I, Abhash, are in some other country and we get accused of robbing a bank, we would like this basic human right to understand what is happening in our court case. Stakes are high, right? Stakes are very high. We could be in prison forever. I mean, some places have still, capital punishment. Stakes are very, very high, and I do believe it's true that when a person isn't understanding the language of their court proceeding, it's kind of like they're not present for their own trial. And I think that's not appropriate. I think that the meaningful participation that we provide to the non-English speaker is extremely important. And a little known fact, we interpret everything that is said in court by everybody. So a lot of people think it's when we communicate with the non-English speaker, the bench, the court communicates with the non-English speaker, and it's only then that no, the interpreter comes in, sits next to the non-English speaker, and whoever is saying, blah, 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 we're here for the case of blah, 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 we're here. And then the attorney says, well, no, that's incorrect. No, that's incorrect. We interpret everything. So this is the meaningful interpretation, or full and complete interpretation, that is provided in our courts. And in this, credentialing is very important because we are striving for accuracy and this meaningful participation.
So how does the work of interpreter help safeguard justice for limited English proficient person?
It safeguards justice because, for one, it maintains the credibility of our courts, right? We want to make sure that we're equal. Justice is equal, and it is, and it has been. And I, for one, believe in our justice system, in our courts. I'm a subscriber, I'm a fan, and I think that making sure that everybody understands everything, that they have equal access and meaningful participation is very important. Now, that is equal access, right? No more, no less. So equal access to an average English speaker who comes in, to participate. That is why we interpret everything the whole, but there's no explaining, right? So it's equal. Interpreters cannot advocate or explain or do anything of that sort. That would be violating the ethics of interpreters.
Okay. Specifically in Iowa itself, I believe there are many people who immigrated here from all over the world with speaking many languages. So, what are the most common language barriers that you found in the courts around Iowa?
So with the language barrier in Iowa, what we run into most is, of course, Spanish, just like everywhere. But there are some languages that are interesting that are specific to Iowa, and this in itself, the different languages in different states is not surprising, right? We have different communities that have settled in different parts of our great nation. So in Iowa, we have a lot of Karen
Hmm.
language that happens. Also Chuukese, French. French is a surprising one as well, but it comes up a lot, as well as Marshallese, Swahili,
Hmm.
Nepali, Arabic, and Burmese.
Hmm.
And if we were to look closer at those languages, it's interesting that only Arabic and French, of course, Spanish. Spanish is always the biggest ever, but Spanish, Arabic, and French would be languages that have a certification.
Hmm.
That are the big ones that come up most in most states. So it's an interesting mix in Iowa.
And does the court only take the certified language interpreters, or are there languages that are unique and different that you don't exactly find certified interpreters?
Well, out of the languages that we mentioned, only three actually have a certification. So only
Hmm.
15 or between 15 to 20 languages have a certification, which means oral exam, where we actually test the interpreter's ability to interpret on all three modes, simultaneous, consecutive, sight with. So only about 15 to 20 languages have that. Uh, and we've worked with over 180 languages in Iowa. So you can imagine that leaves a lot. However, we do have a process. We that is part of what our office does is we have a credentialing process 2 times a year. We have interpreters do an application. Prospective interpreters do an application with a background check. We do some screening, and then they do a orientation workshop, which is made sure that that interpreter is highly proficient in both languages we're talking about, right?
Hmm.
And we prepare them ethics wise for courts. This is immensely important.
And how many cases do your language office has to deal with throughout Iowa?
It's a great question, and it would surprise many people. We are actually last both since joining the team here in late 2001. I've started implemented our language access annual report, where we outline, the cases, number, languages, everything, all the interesting facts. And believe it or not, for the last 2 years, we have had over 10,000
Hmm.
events in Iowa courts for language events. They are increasing. From 22 to 23, we had a 15% increase, while most states typically experience about 3 to 5% increase yearly. We had 15%. So it is growing. Recently, all states are experiencing a lot of increase. So absolutely, it's an interesting fact. More than you would think for Iowa in the Midwest.
And is our court resourced well enough to provide the interpreters for all of those cases?
Absolutely. We have not yet had a case. Our fill rate is great, and we have not yet had a case where we were unable to bring an interpreter.
Hmm.
It does not matter the language. Have had the fortune of doing this job in numerous states and being an interpreter myself. I am very involved in this. I go to conferences, symposiums, and it's going somewhere with me is horrible because I'm always on the hunt. I see somebody who may speak another language, and I'm over there sweet talking them. Hey, this may be something for you. So yes, we are doing well in Iowa right now. There's not a huge issue or a challenge. Nothing that deviates from what other states are
So,
experiencing.
how many court interpreters are there, and are they part of the Iowa court's staff, or how would you categorize them?
So the number of court interpreters in our office is very surprising, and it is zero.
Hmm.
We do not have court interpreters in our offices. Court interpreters are, for most part, independent contractors. And this is similar, excuse me, and this is similar, again, it does not deviate from other states' language access programs. Most all really of our interpreters, we have about 60 or so on the roster right now and hundreds on our internal lists, and they are all independent contractors. And like I said, that is how it is mostly in most states now.
Do the people, when they need interpreters, do they expect the court to provide it for them, or are they allowed to bring their own interpreters? How does that work?
So part of our job is to let the public know that this is a service we provide. And
Hmm.
one of the first things that when I joined the team here that we did was create a pretty laminated sign with language occurring most in Iowa to put in all prominent spots in all of our courtrooms, in all of our districts, in all of our counties, so that so that folks know that this is a service we provide. If they need an interpreter, the court will schedule an interpreter for them. However, parties are not allowed to bring their own interpreters. We would not want family members or somebody else interpreting. We would not want untrained persons interpreting. Like we said, stakes are very high there, so we do need to use credentialed court interpreters, and this is per Iowa court rules. Also, the court interpreters, this is important to mention, I mentioned their labor classification, they're independent contractors per their labor classification mostly. However, they are indeed officers of the court as far as their role. And they're there to also help the court communicate with that non-English speaker, not only for the non-English speaker to communicate. And this is why, another reason why parties cannot bring their own interpreters to provide interpretation.
As you said, there has not been any cases that we are not able to provide interpreters from Iowa, and great thanks to your work. But has there ever been cases it's really hard to find an interpreter for specific languages that you have come across?
It can be very challenging. If you have extremely rare, limited resource languages where we've had situation where there's maybe only about 10,000 native speakers of a particular language. And that may sound like a lot, but if you think about it worldwide, close to 10,000 court interpreters in the US. So if you have a language with 10 or 4 to 40,000 native speakers, it is incredibly challenging
Mhm.
to find an interpreter who is also credentialed, right? So we can't use just anybody. This is very, very important. So in those situations, we follow strict priorities procedures, right? So the first thing where we look is, do we have a certified or credentialed interpreter on our roster? If that's not the case, then we look at the rosters of neighboring states, and for criminal cases, even farther. US-wide, that net gets cast very, all of America. We look for certified credentialed interpreters for that language. If that does not exist, we will then look at some of our internal SharePoint lists where we have other interpreters, maybe for languages that are, credentialing is not, well, credentialing exists, but
Mhm.
maybe they haven't gone through. We look at medical interpreters, we look at community interpreters, school interpreters. We look at college professors. We even at the very last stages look at some NGOs, and I remember, for example, in Seattle, where I was before coming here, well, there we had up to 200 language events per day, believe it or
Yeah.
not, sometimes with how richly diverse Seattle is. But we had a language that came up, which was I believe Garifuna. Garifuna language was the name, spoken in parts of Nicaragua. And even though Seattle's resources are, I mean, like a little UN, we could not find an interpreter. And I forgot to mention, we also share resources with other states. My counterpart, every state has my counterpart position. We have a meeting once a month where we share resources for
Oh,
extreme
that's
learning.
awesome.
Yeah, so that's another great resource. But in that situation, what we kind of had to, and I'm doing air quotes now, create an interpreter. We had to groom an interpreter. We found a gentleman who was working to keep that language from becoming extinct in an association of that community, who we brought in. We did a crash course on ethics, on what, and it took a while, but we kind of created an interpreter, so to say, for that.
Mhm.
So it can be interesting and very challenging. Yes.
So, what is the process for people with limited English proficiency to communicate with the course, just ask for help? I need somebody who can translate. And how do you begin the process of communicating if somebody needs a translator or not?
Absolutely. That's a great question. So our non-English speakers have a variety of ways they can. So at any point, whenever any court staff have an indication, a party or an interested person in the court system does not speak English, they would um, enter that information into case management system. And I want to plug, we're doing a new interpreter scheduling application now, where when that indication is in case management, our new application will communicate real time with our court case management and put that as a line for our wonderful district language access coordinators to schedule interpreters for. We've been working a long time for that. It's going to be amazing, deployed pretty soon. As far as your question, anytime they can come, so non-English speakers can come to court and talk to clerks or reception and come in, at which point our court staff has the ability to use Language Line, a private sector company that can only be used for this kind of customer service, because they don't always use credentialed interpreters like what we've described earlier, how we have to.
Hmm.
So they would communicate with court staff through this telephonic language line, and can let us know, they need an interpreter for what language. Also in court, sometimes we don't know until the hearing, where they can raise their hand and indicate they don't speak English, and that's when we note that indicator. Also, so in that, I'm speaking more if people are pro se, so without legal representation, without counsel. Otherwise, we do have a form which is very helpful and is a trigger for the process. Again, more into answering your question, it's an application for appointment of a court interpreter. Uh, Attorneys would fill that out and submit, and that is the trigger, first step for us to have an interpreter at all of the hearings, or the parties themselves could submit that form if they want to.
Yeah. So, if people are interested in being part of the court interpreter for Iowa system, what are the qualifications they need, and how would they be in contact in being part of the team?
So this is an interesting part with court interpreters. And it's something that I learned throughout my career. In the very beginning, I my background is language teaching and interpretation. That was my degree. That was my major. It's my passion. Languages in all forms, and for a very long time, I felt that is what the profession should be: is linguists, professional court interpreters, teachers. People who are in one way, some shape or form in linguistics. However, through the course of my career, I ran into some colleagues who were unbelievably amazing court interpreters, who who came from all walks of lives and did all different things. For example, we had a guitar player
Mhm.
who was an amazing interpreter. I mean, uh, missed nothing, like amazing memory and that transition that gets done in an interpreter's brain, incoming and
Mhm.
speaking at the same, that's called subvocal rehearsal. Science has no idea how that happens even to this day. But this gentleman was amazing and is a guitar player. And we found that musicians often had a very good inclination for interpreting. There was an individual who was a gardener. We had somebody who was a psychologist. So in psychology, so what we look for absolutely is college level knowledge of both English and the language in question. Absolutely. Uh, and what the person who wants to try court interpreting, we encourage everyone is to look on our website to find out what the requirements are. It starts with an application and a background check, and it's a process. It's not very demanding, but it can take some time, but it's amazingly rewarding because we're helping people. It's a wonderful profession.
Thank you, Chris, for sharing your passion and valuable insight into the importance of interpreters in Iowa Judicial Branch and how Iowans benefit the having skilled interpreters who ensure the equal access and meaningful participation for all. Thank you all for tuning in. We'll be back next month with another informative topic. Until then, thank you for listening to In the Balance.